Rain fell like a curse, that night, not the cleansing kind, but a cold, persistent drizzle that seeped through wool and bone alike. I remember the mud, first, thick, black, and clinging, as if the earth itself hungered for us. We were 12 men, British, Australian. One South African dragged from the shattered barn outside Caen 2 days after the breakout began. Our captors weren't regulars. Not very much not. Even SS. They wore mismatched uniforms, their faces hollowed by sleeplessness and something darker. The kind of rage that doesn't burn hot, but simmers, slow and poisonous. Fell gendarmerie, maybe, or were Ceresat's troops pressed into service after Normandy collapsed. Whatever they were, they moved with the brittle certainty of men who'd stopped believing in tomorrow. They didn't speak much, just barked orders in guttural German, prodding us forward with rifle butts when our legs gave out no blindfolds. No sacks over our heads. They wanted us to see, to understand, to feel the arc of our ending before it landed. By dusk, they halted us in a ravine east of St. Foy Montgomery, where the hedgerows grew dense and the land sloped into shadow. An oak stood there, gnarled and lightning-scarred, its branches clawing at a sky-bruised purple-gray. Around it, the ground had been churned by boots and tires, and waiting, rusted, dented, but sharp enough. Dig, the officer said. He was tall, lean, with a jaw like forged iron and eyes that never blinked long enough to betray anything human. Hauptmann Vogt, I'd learned later, a man who'd lost his entire platoon to a single British sapper team the week before. Revenge, then, not orders, not policy. Personal? We hesitated. One boy, Peters, barely 19, from Ledstagard forward, hands shaking so badly, he dropped his shovel into the mire. A rifle cracked. Not aimed at him, just into the air. A warning wrapped in thunder. So we dug. The first strokes were mechanical, numb, then it became something Elsa Ritual, grotesque and intimate. Each scoop of earth felt like carving out your own coffin from the inside. The mud sucked at the blades. Our breath came in ragged gasps, clouding in the damp air. Someone wept softly, not from fear, but from exhaustion so deep it hollowed the soul. I kept my eyes on the roots, twisting through the soil pail. Slick things that seemed to coil away from the metal like they knew what we were doing. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had bled into the rain. The pit grew deeper, wider, 6 feet long. For across, just enough, the 12 bodies stacked like cordwood. No markers, no prayers, just dirt over silence. When we finished, we stood at the edge, trembling, coats plastered to our backs, fingers raw. Vogt stepped forward, boots crunching on wet leaves. He didn't look at the grave. He looked at us as if measuring how much of our humanity had already rotted away. "You will be shot at dawn," he said, voice flat, surgical. But by military tradition, a condemned man may make one final request. A bitter laugh. Escape Jenkins, the Aussie tradition, from you. Wogt's eyes flicked toward him, cold, unmoving. "Say your piece or don't. It changes nothing." We exchanged glances. What could we ask for? A letter home. Tobacco, a priest who wouldn't come. Each thought curdled in the silence. Peters began to shake again, teeth chattering like dice in a cup. Then I stepped forward. "My name is Daniel Harrow. I was a schoolteacher in Kent before the war. I know the weight of words, how they can wound, console, or really deflect death. I request," I said, voice steadier than I felt, "that we be allowed to bury our dead properly." Vogt frowned. "You are the dead." "No," I said, meeting his gaze. "We readily been, and if you kill us, will still be your responsibility. Under the Geneva Convention, Article 120, the remains of persons who have died in captivity shall be respected. Burial shall be honorable." He went very still. Around me, my comrades held their breath. Even the rain seemed to hush. Wagda's fingers twitched near his sidearm. For a heartbeat, I thought he'd shoot me where I stood. Instead, He tilted his head slightly, as if recalibrating the world. "Geneva," he said, almost amused. "You quote Geneva." "Here I do," I said, because even in war, there are lines. He studied Minot with hatred, but something harder to name. Calculation, perhaps, or the ghost of a conscience buried deep beneath layers of duty and grief. Then, without another word, he turned to his men. "Bring the bodies." We didn't understand naught at first, but minutes later they dragged 3 forms from the back of a Kubel wagon. German soldiers. Young, uniforms torn, faces pale beneath dried blood, killed by a stray shell or British strafing. No. One said they'd been tossed into the truck like sacks of grain, forgotten in the chaos. Vogt pointed to the pit we'd dug. "You wanted a proper burial. Bury them. A trap. A mockery. Or at this." I looked at the Botas boys no older than Petersand. Then at the open grave yawning at our feet. To refuse was to invite execution. To comply was to serve our enemies dead. But I saw something else. A chance, not to save ourselves through courage, but through protocol, through the very rules war pretends to honor, even as it breaks them. "Very well," I said, picking up my shovel again. "But we'll need clean cloth for shrouds, and we'll say the words." Vogt stared at me a long moment. Then, with a curt nod, he turned away. "Do it." And so, under a weeping sky, 12 condemned men began to wash the faces of their enemies, wrapping them in strips torn from our own shirts, whispering the 23rd Psalm in English, while rain blurred the lines between killer and killed, victor and vanquished. I didn't know then if it would be enough, only that in that moment, dignity was the last weapon we had, and I would wield it like a blade. The rain softened as we worked, shifting from a drumming downpour to a hushed mist that clung to our hair and eyelashes like breath made visible. We moved with a strange, solemn precision, hands that had trembled only minutes before now steady as they smoothed mud from the dead boys' brows, closed eyelids that stared blankly at the indifferent sky. One of them, blonde, freckled, no older than 16 still, clutched a locket in his fist. I didn't pry it loose. Instead, I folded his fingers gently over it, as a brother might. Jenkins, ever sharp despite his fear, began humming Abide With Me, low and tuneless, and after a beat, Peters joined in, voice cracking but clear. Soon, the whole line of us stood shoulder to shoulder over those 3 broken forms, voices weaving through the dripping trees, like a thread stitching together what war had torn apart. Vogt watched from beneath the brim of his cap, arms crossed, motionless, except for the slow tap of his boot heel against a root. He didn't interrupt, didn't sneer. Hus observed, as if witnessing something he hadn't seen since childhood, something he'd forgotten existed. When the bodies were laid in the grave, not stacked but side by side, heads to the east as custom dictated, I turned to him. "We'll need earth blessed in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit," I said, not as a plea, but as a quiet assertion of ritual he couldn't deny without revealing the lie at the heart of his authority. He exhaled sharply through his nose, half irritation, half something else. Nodded to a corporal who filled a dented canteen cup with rainwater from a puddle. It wasn't holy water, but it was water, and in that moment, it would have to do. I stepped to the edge of the grave, shovel in hand, and began the committal. My voice didn't falter, though my knees nearly did. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Each spadeful landed with a soft thud, covering not enemy, not stranger, but simply the dead. And with every handful, I felt the invisible noose around our necks. Loosen Hus slightly, just enough to draw breath. When the grave was filled, we marked it with a crude cross fashioned from broken hedgerow stakes. No names, no ranks, just 3 souls returned to the earth with the dignity war so rarely affords. Then came the silence thicker than before, charged not with dread, but with uncertainty. Vogt lit a cigarette with hands that, for the first time, betrayed a tremor. He took a slow drag, eyes fixed on the cross. "You think quoting Geneva makes you safe, is sight?" At last, smoke curling from his lips, like ghost breath. You think decency is a shield? No, I replied. But it's a mirror, and sometimes even executioners catch their reflection. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked to the Kubelwagen, speaking in low tones to his radio operator. We heard crackling static, then a series of codes, then silence. Minutes stretched like wire pulled taut, then a voice from the truck. Urgent, sharp. Vogt stiffened, snatched the receiver. Listened. His face, already carved from stone, seemed to fracture inward. Scheiss, he muttered, not loud. But the word carried like a stone dropped into a well. He turned back to us, eyes scanning our faces not with contempt now, but with a dawning horror that mirrored our own. Orders have changed, he said, voice stripped of its earlier certainty. A counterattack has been launched near Falaise. Our division is to fall back immediately. No prisoners. My blood turned to ice. No prisoners. The phrase hung in the air like a death sentence already signed. But then he added, almost to himself, except those who have rendered service to the fallen. He looked at the grave, at the cross, at us. Under Article 16 of the Geneva Convention, he continued, the words, stiff, formal, as if reciting from memory against his will, posts who assist in the burial of enemy dead may be granted provisional reprieve on grounds of humanitarian conduct. It wasn't mercy, it was bureaucracy. But in war, sometimes bureaucracy is the only angel left with wings intact. He barked orders. The guards lowered their rifles. Not all the way, but enough. You'll march with us? Vogt said. To the rear command post at Liv. There, your status will be reviewed. It wasn't freedom, it was delay. But delay is oxygen when you're suffocating. We were given water, a crust of black bread each. No restraints. As we formed a ragged column behind the truck, Peters stumbled, and without thinking, I caught his arm. Vogt saw it, didn't comment, just watched, as if reassessing the arithmetic of our humanity. The march was silent, haunted by the weight of what had almost been. Every rustle in the hedgerows made my heart lurch. Every distant artillery thump, a reminder that reprieve wasn't rescue. Yet with each step, I felt something stir not hope. Not yet, but the ghost of it. The fragile conviction that sometimes, in the darkest hour, the most ordinary act burying the dead with care can become the most extraordinary rebellion. And yet, as the eastern sky began to pale, I caught Vogt glancing back at us, not with suspicion, but with something like unease. He hadn't broken his orders. He'd bent them just enough to let light through. But men like him don't bend without cost. I wondered what price he'd paid when his superiors learned he'd spared 12 enemies because they dewashed 3 corpses. We reached a crossroads, just as dawn broke a sliver of gold cutting through the gray. There, Vogt halted the column. He walked it to me, stopping so close I could smell the damp wool of his tunic, the stale tobacco on his breath. If you ever tell this story, he said, voice low, say I did it because I had to, not because I wanted to. I met his eyes. I'll say you followed the rules. He gave a single, sharp nod, then turned and barked for the column to move out. Behind us, the graves slept beneath the oak, already vanishing into mist. Ahead, uncertainty. But for now we walked. Alive, not by luck, not by valor, but by the unbearable weight of a simple, decent act in a world bent on forgetting what decency means. The road to Levarit wound through a landscape unraveled by war hedgerows, torn open by tank treads. Barns slumped like broken spines, the air thick with a metallic aftertaste of spent shells and burning rubber. We walked in silence, not out of fear now, but exhaustion so profound it hollowed speech from our throats. Our guards, too, moved with a strange lethargy, their eyes darting less toward us and more toward the horizon, where the thunder of distant guns rolled like a storm that refused to break. The battlefield had shifted, and with it, the meaning of enemies. We were no longer threats to be erased, but burdens to be shuffled alive. Yes, but only as long as paperwork and retreat schedules allowed. At midday, We passed a destroyed panzer for smoldering in a ditch, its turret blown clean off, resting upside down like a beetle on its back. A crow perched on the barrel, pecking at something dark and glistening. Peters turned his face away. Jenkins muttered a curse under his breath. I said nothing. I was watching Vogt. He hadn't spoken since the crossroads, but his posture had changed, shoulders less rigid, jaw less clenched. Once, when a shell screamed overhead, he instinctively stepped between us and the blast direction, as if shielding us. He caught himself immediately, stiffened, and barked an order about keeping formation. But the gesture had been real, felt, and it unsettled me more than any threat ever had. By late afternoon, we reached the outskirts of La Verite town that had once been all stone cottages and orchards, now reduced to skeletal chimneys and piles of rubble. German vehicles clogged the narrow streets. Ambulances, half-tracks, staff cars with officers shouting into field telephones. The retreat was in full, panicked motion. Papers fluttered from overturned desks. A field kitchen burned, unattended, its pot of stew bubbling blackly over flames. We were herded into the courtyard of a requisitioned schoolhouse, its windows shattered, blackboard still bearing chalked drills in German grammar. There, under a ripped Reichshitler banner, flapping like a wounded bird, an officer sat at a folding table, sorting documents with the grim efficiency of a man who knows his war is ending. Vogt approached him, saluted, and began speaking in low, urgent tones. I caught fragments. Hennebartikel dies, burial conducted with full rites. Humanitarian exception. The officer, thin-faced, spectacles, smudged Bailey, looked up. He scribbled something, stamped a paper, and waved us toward a corner of the yard where other posts huddled beneath a tarp. But before we moved, Vogt turned to me. One last time, not with words, just a look fleeting, almost imperceptible, that said everything. This is as far as I can take you. The rest is chance. They gave us a blanket each, a scrap of cheese, and silence. Night fell fast, heavy with the smell of wet ash and diesel. I lay awake long after the others slept, listening to the murmur of retreating engines, the occasional burst of static from radios, the distant moan of a wounded horse somewhere in the ruins. My mind circled back to the grave in the ravine, to the locket in the boy's hand, to Tuak's trembling cigarette. What had that moment been? Not salvation, no. That came later. But the crack through which salvation might slip. A single human choice in a machine designed to obliterate humanity. Dawn brought rain again. Softer this time. And with it, new orders. A Wehrmacht captain with a blood-stained bandage on his temple announced that all non-essential personnel in posts were to be handed over to advancing Allied forces within 24 hours. Surrender protocol, he said, voice flat, as if reading from a manual he no longer believed in. You'll be processed at Cannes. Relief should have flooded me. It didn't. Instead, a cold dread pooled in my gut, because I knew somehow, deep in the marrow of my bones, that the war wasn't done with us yet. Later that morning, as we were marched toward a convoy of trucks idling near the town square, I saw her, a woman. She stood in the doorway of a half-collapsed bakery, barefoot, dress stained with soot and something darker. Her eyes wide, hollow-locked onto ours as we passed. And then, without warning, she lunged forward, screaming in French, spittle flying from her lips. "Assassins!" she shrieked, pointing at us. "You bombed my children! You killed them while they slept!" Guards pulled her back, but her voice followed us like a curse. "Murderers! Cowards!" Jenkins flinched. Peters began to sob quietly. I said nothing, but her words coiled inside me, twisting the fragile peace I'd begun to feel. Were we the saved Orthez? And what debt did survival incur? We boarded the trucks under gray skies. No one spoke. Even the guards seemed subdued, as if the weight of collapse pressed equally on victor and vanquished alike. Hours later, near St. Pierre-sur-Dives, the convoy halted. Not for orders, not for fuel, but because the road ahead was blocked by a column of British tanks, Shermans, mud-caked and battle-worn, their turrets swiveling like wary beasts. Cheers erupted from our truck. Men pounded the sides, shouted names of regiments, of hometowns. Peters laughed through tears. But I didn't cheer. Because as the British soldiers approached, helmets askew, faces young and grim, I saw them look at us not with joy, but suspicion. Then confusion. Then something colder. One officer, his uniform smeared with dirt and dried blood, stepped forward, eyeing our mismatched clothes, our gaunt faces. "You Yangs?" he asked. "No," I said. "British. Captured near Ken. July 18th. He frowned. "We've got no record of a capture that day. No Allied unit reported missing men in that sector." The air went still. "We were with the sappers," Jenkins said quickly. 4 Redcon got cut off during the breakout." The officer studied us, then pulled a radio handset from his belt, spoke in clipped tones, waited, listened. Then he looked at us again, this time with narrowed eyes. "There were no sappers operating west of Burgabus on the 18th. He sighed it slowly. Only a German engineering unit and a massacre of civilians in Saint-Foy." My stomach dropped. He stepped closer. "Who are you people?" Before I could answer, another voice cut through the tension, calm, authoritative. "Let them pass." We turned. A major stood there, cap low over his brow, insignia of intelligence corps on his shoulder. He'd appeared silently, as if summoned by the lie we hadn't yet told. "They've been verified," he said to the officer. "Their unit was classified. Lost records. Happens more than you'd think." The young officer hesitated, then saluted and stepped back. The major approached us. His eyes gray, unreadable, settled on me. "You're Daniel Harrow," he said. Not a question. I nodded. "Come with me." He led me aside, away from the others, to the shadow of a ruined stable. Rain dripped from the broken roof. "You buried 3 German soldiers," he said quietly, "in a ravine east of Saint-Foy. With shrouds, with psalms." My throat tightened. "How do you?" Vogt sent a coded message before his unit disintegrated. The major interrupted. "Not to his command. To a Swiss Red Cross liaison, cited Geneva Article 16. Requested confirmation of your status." I stared at him. "He protected us. He documented you, which means, officially, you never existed as prisoners of his command. You were reassigned to avoid reprisals." The major's mouth twisted slightly, a strange kind of honor. He handed me a small, oilskin-wrapped packet. "Your papers, new identities. You'll be debriefed in London." Quietly. "Why?" I asked, voice barely a whisper. "Because," he said, "men who choose decency over survival in the heart of hell are either saints or spies, and we need to know which you are." He turned to leave, then paused. "Also, the woman in Liverette. Her children weren't killed by bombs. They were shot by retreating SS. But grief doesn't care for facts. Remember that he walked Hawaii boots crunching on broken tile." I rejoined the others, the packet hidden inside my tunic, cold against my skin. We were free. But freedom, I realized, wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of the reckoning, and somewhere in the ruins of a France bleeding out its last summer, Hauptmann Vogt was either dead, captured, or vanished into the chaos's single act of mercy already erased from history. Known only to the rain, the oak, and 12 men walking toward a peace they weren't sure they deserved. London in November was a city wrapped in fog and fatigue, its streets slick with drizzle, its people moving with the hunched shoulders of those who'd outlived too much. I arrived at Victoria Station with a false name stitched inside my collar and a silence stitched deeper into my bones. The others had been sent to separate debriefing centers, Jenkins to Aldershot, Peters to a convalescent home in Somerset. Only I was brought to a narrow townhouse off Curzon Street, its windows blacked out, its door guarded by a man who didn't salute, didn't speak, just nodded me through with eyes that had seen files burn. Inside, the air smelled of pipe tobacco, damp wool, and something sharper ink perhaps, or the faint, metallic tang of fear. The Major, now introduced only as Colonel Ashworth, met me in a study lined with books that hadn't been opened in years. Maps of Normandy covered one wall, pinned with colored threads that told stories of movements, betrayals, and disappearances. He offered me tea. I accepted, though my hand still remembered the weight of a shovel more than a cup. For 3 days, they questioned me. Not with threats, but with precision. Every detail. The angle of the ravine, the make of Vogt's sidearm, the exact wording of the psalm we'd They cross-referenced my account with intercepted German radio logs, with refugee testimonies, with the recovered journal of a Red Cross courier who'd vanished near Lisieux. They wanted to know if Vogt had known who I was really known, if I'd given him anything, if he'd asked for anything in return. I told them everything, except the truth I'd only just begun to understand myself, that I had NT saved us by quoting Geneva. ID saved us by refusing to become what the war wanted us to be, brutes who dig graves and forget the names of the dead. On the 4th morning, Ashworth summoned me one last time. He sat behind a desk, now cleared of papers. Only a single photograph, resting atop the blotter. It showed a man in civilian clothes, standing on a train platform in Basel, face turned away from the camera. The date stamp read, October 1944. Vogt, Ashworth said. He crossed into Switzerland 3 weeks ago. Discharged under a false name, works now as a night clerk at a railway depot. I said nothing. He sent this. Ashworth slid a sealed envelope across the desk. No stamp, no address, just my real name Harrow written in precise, angular script. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No salutation, no signature, just 3 lines. You were right. There are lines. I crossed one the day I let you live. May you never have to choose between them again. I folded the note, my throat tight. Ashworth watched me, his expression unreadable. We could bring him in, he said. Question him. He knows things about Falaise, about the executions in Singfoy, things that could hang 6 senior Wehrmacht officers. You won't, I said. It wasn't a question. Eliane the Bach, steepling his fingers. No, we won't. We won't, because his testimony would require revealing your story, the burial. The reprievand, that would mean admitting we held men without record, that Geneva was bent to convenience. It would look like collusion, or worse, weakness. He paused, then added, almost gently, some truths are too dangerous to be true. He stood, walked to the window, and pulled aside the blackout curtain just enough to let in a sliver of gray London light. You'll be returned to active duty next month. Not combat, intelligence. You have a gift for reading men in the moment before they break. I thought of Peters, still trembling in his cot, of Genkins, who hadn't spoken of the grave since of the woman with the soot-streaked face, screaming at ghosts. I don't want to read men, I said. I want to forget them. Ashworth smiled faintly. War doesn't let you forget. It only lets you choose what to carry. He handed me a new file, My New Life. Then, as I turned to leave, he said, one more thing. That locket the boy held. Vogt retrieved it before he left, sent it to the Red Cross. It contained a photograph of his mother and a train ticket stub from Hamburg to Paris, dated 1938. A was Jewish, drafted in 42. Refused to reveal it, probably why he was assigned to rear Siccaré to keep him from the front, or from being discovered. I stopped in the doorway. The weight of that knowledge settled over me like a second skin. Vogt hadn't just spared us. He deburied one of his own, perhaps. The last Jew his unit would ever unknowingly carry, and in doing so, buried a part of himself too. I walked out into the London fog, the note folded inside my breast pocket, close to my heart. The war wasn't over, not really. But something in me had ended, and something else had begun. The quiet, relentless burden of having been saved by a gesture, so small it would never make the history books, yet so vast it had rewritten the course of 12 lives. Years later, long after the medals were stored and the nightmares grew quieter, I returned to Normandy, not as a soldier, but as a teacher again, leading students through cemeteries where white crosses stretched like waves. I never found the ravine. The land had healed over, trees grown thick. The oak perhaps felled for firewood or war. But I stood where I thought it might have been, and I whispered the 23rd psalm knot for the German boys. Not for us, but for Vote who chose, in the final calculus of cruelty, to honor the dead rather than erase them. And in that choice, he gave us back our souls. History remembers battles, treaties, heroes, and monsters. But it forgets the moments in between when a man, knee-deep in mud and death, asks only that the fallen be treated as human, and in doing so, reminds the living how to be the same.